I'd like us to think about the Reconstruction book, his Reconstruction in Philosophy. I hope you have it with you. And next week we'll be getting into phenomenology and existentialism. 2 weeks of that before we have another examination. Ouch. No, I'm not saying that for you, I'm saying that for me. Ouch.
Those exams don't take long for you to write up.
No, they don't. They just take an awful lot for me to write down on your exams, yeah. And then we'll have the remaining 4 weeks, I think it is, on 19th and 20th century empirical and analytic philosophy. Okay? Okay, so I guess that's it. All right, Dewey's Reconstruction. The title is the giveaway, isn't it? And consequently, in the light of that title, I've subtitled all the chapters, Two Views of, this, that, and the other. Because I think he's consistent in carrying through the theme of the overall title all the way through the book. He's talking about what philosophy classically has been and what he thinks it ought to be. And the same with regards to each area of philosophical inquiry. And so you get these two views. But I think it's important to recognize that underlying his disagreements with what philosophy has been is a very different view of human nature than in the classical tradition. After all, classical philosophy was substance rather than process in its metaphysics. That is to say, an unchanging, qualitatively unchanging entity is basic to everything. And so in talking about human nature, the underlying substance, of course, is that substance, or those substances which make up a human being. With emphasis on a soul substance, or the body substance, matter, and qualities, functions thereof. Now, when you change from that substance view to process view, it may be difficult to say it in the English that has been shaped as a language by substance thought, but the fact is that a human is a process, not a substance, ultimately. That if we're going to therefore understand human nature and implement a view of human nature into philosophy, we have first of all to think of the human as a process of experience. Now, if you say, why experience? The answer, I think, is twofold. One, from an empirical standpoint, how do we talk about personal identity? If it is not, as in the empiricist tradition back to John Locke, in terms of the way in which memory of the past and anticipation of the future are identified within present experience. So it is the matter of experience by virtue of which we have any identity of which we're conscious. That, if you like, is the epistemological reason. But, of course, the other reason is that in this Hegelian tradition, in which, following Kant, human consciousness is the lens through which everything is understood, And the Hegelian tradition with its unfolding of consciousness in the process of history, you see, how are you going to describe any evolutionary process? And inasmuch as Dewey is, as we noted last time, evolutionary naturalist, the process of evolutionary development is really an extensive process of experience. And certainly for a human being, life is experience. In fact, it's interesting that in our day, there's a popular use of the term reality, which makes it difficult for beginning students, I'm finding, to get a handle on what is metaphysics. Because the popular use of the term reality is what's real in my experience, rather than what is real in itself. You get the difference? Metaphysics is concerned with the thing in itself, reality. But reality has come to mean the reality of my experience. You see? Well, that's part of this whole movement of thought out of the 19th century German tradition into, yeah, we'll see it into existentialism and so forth, but certainly into Whitehead and Dewey. So the human has to be understood then in terms of this, this concept of experience, the very rich concept of experience, much richer than that thin sort of one-dimensional concept which John Locke has, of simply made up of simple ideas. Much richer than that. But when you start approaching what is human nature in terms of experience, then it's understandable that he's going to be saying that human beings are first and foremost creatures of desire rather than intellect. Because concrete experience comes loaded with emotional orientation, with affective attitudes towards past, present, future, the whole thing. Now add that to his functionalist psychology that we were talking about, and you can see that in any case, thought is going to be simply a function of a biological organism in response to experience, which initially is, being physiologically based, is affective initially. So a very different conception of man than that of the rational soul inhabiting a body with some fixed essence to human nature, and so forth. Very, very different. So then, in the first chapter, he stakes that out in the first half dozen pages, if you like, as premises of the entire book. And then goes on to point out that the old philosophy is one consolidated as theoretical doctrines because it arose from the desire is the key word. You see, philosophies, doctrines, moral beliefs arise out of the desire to consolidate, to retain the past, so that the ideals that were successful in the past should be perpetuated. And so it's as if we want a quick freeze-dried past and accordingly a philosophy of static positions, unchanging. Whereas what we need to do is to recognize that experience is an ongoing thing, life is an ongoing thing, and philosophy is not to be a set of doctrines, but rather a reflective attitude about experience and desires and conflicts of desire and threats to what we desire. So philosophy for Dewey is more attitude, the philosophical attitude, if you like, than it is any set of doctrines. Which is why when I talk of Dewey as an evolutionary naturalist and ascribe to him a metaphysical naturalism as well as a methodological naturalism, I do it with sort of a hesitance in my philosophical conscience, because he doesn't want to be thought of as having a set of fixed doctrines. But of course he does. One of them being his evolutionary naturalism, and another is functionalist psychology, and so forth. So that's the first note to strike there. Feel free to feedback, react, question, comment on this as I talk. 6. Bottom of page 5, he says, we need to recognize that the ordinary consciousness of the ordinary man, that's what he's after, the ordinary consciousness of the ordinary person, experience, you see, left to himself, is a creature of desires. The consciousness is a creature of desires, rather than of intellectual study, inquiry, or speculation. Ceases to be primarily activated by hopes, fears, and so forth, only when he's subjected to a discipline that's foreign to human nature, which from the standpoint of the natural is artificial. And so the artificiality, then, of classic philosophy. All right, the historical factors in Chapter 2, his review of some historical factors in reconstructing philosophy, really two views of knowledge, where the old, which he traces back to people like Aristotle, is the attempt to find unchanging truth about unchanging essences. And you do that, of course, by abstracting from experience rather than working with experience. You abstract from it the essence of a species and do deductive reasoning from your knowledge of those first principles abstracted. So that's the form that knowledge takes. But the other kind of knowledge is what was introduced by Francis Bacon with his classic dictum that knowledge is power, not contemplation of essences, but power, not knowledge of the unchanging, but knowing how to affect change, knowing how to exercise the power to change. And that is the big watershed, that distinction.